Good morning, everyone. This is another occasion, and this has happened quite often this year, where I have to do more introduction of myself than the speaker because everybody knows the speaker. But my name is Bob Willey, and I have the privilege of serving as the president of the Friends of the Georgetown Library. It really is a very special honor with an incredible group of staff and a beautiful library that's about to be closed, but I'll talk about that later, and renovated, so I don't want to leave it at that. I better keep going with that. That's not good to leave it at closed. To be renovated, but we'll talk about that after the presentation this morning. This is our lecture series. This is the end of our sixth lecture series, 2022-23. We go from September through May, and it's entitled Tuesdays With. And we chose that title at the very beginning of the series, back 6 years ago, based on the book Tuesdays with Morrie, a 1997 bestseller. Just a beautiful book because it talks about what was a continuing, ongoing relationship between a professor and a student that went far beyond the traditional 4 years of college. And that's what our series is all about, an opportunity to be able to have continual learning for all, because it isn't something that ends when we are 21 or 25 or whatever the case might be in those early years, but something that is important for us to continue doing all through our lives, to be lifelong learners. And so we're privileged to be able to provide this series, which emphasizes mostly Georgetown County and what's happening here in all kinds of ways, from history to nature to biography, which is our topic for today. Just an important way to get to understand our own neighborhood in special ways. So we're glad to have you here today. And today we have Tuesday with Robin Salmon. Privileged to have her here with us. She is the Vice President of Art, and you have a very long title. In fact, it fills up the whole of your, but wow, Vice President of Art and Historical Collections and Curator of Sculpture at Brookgreen Gardens. Brookgreen has a collection of nearly 3,000 works by over 450 sculptors. Exhibited within the garden is the largest and most comprehensive collection of American figurative sculpture in the country, by sculptors who worked from the early 19th century all the way up to the present. Robin is a graduate of the University of South Carolina and the Museum Management Institute, and is the author of 5 books on Brookgreen Gardens and the co-author of 8 other books on other art and history subjects. It's all those kind of things, kind of neat to know that, and just to appreciate very much the gift that we have of her being here with us today. Last year, in 2022, she was the recipient of the Medal of Honor by the National Sculpture Society for her lifetime of service to the field. Join me in welcoming Robin Salmon.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be in Georgetown. It's only a few miles between Georgetown and Brookgreen, but sometimes it's like the other side of the universe. But it's fun for me to be here. Anna Hyatt Huntington is a tough subject. She lived to be 97 years old. She worked until a year before her death, and trying to condense that life, all the things that she did, the high points of that life, into 45 minutes, it is kind of tough. So I hope I've done her justice. And I hope I can work this. Okay. Anna Von Hyatt Huntington was an unusual woman with quiet personal style and rare artistic vision. She loved animals, people, and music in that order. She was 5 feet 9 inches tall, slender, and had red hair and green eyes, but she did not have the fiery temperament that sometimes accompanies those physical characteristics. She had a good sense of humor and a high level of confidence. She was known for her kindness, generous spirit, and concern for others. In 1923, after she married the prominent businessman and scholar Archer Milton Huntington, they joined forces to extend their philanthropy from coast to coast. establishing museums and providing financial support to countless arts, literary, and historical organizations. Their beneficence was far-reaching and influential. Anna was born March the 10th, 1876 in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Her father, Alpheus Hyatt, a graduate of the Lawrence Scientific School of Harvard, was a renowned scientist in the fields of paleontology, zoology, and marine biology. He was a faculty member of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and Boston University. He was curator of the paleontology collection of Harvard and of the Boston Society of Natural History. And he was an elected member of the National Academy of Sciences, founder of a laboratory known today as the Woods Hole Marine Science Institute, and was co-founder of the American Society of Naturalists. Her mother, Adela Beebe, was well educated for her time and was an amateur painter. Although Anna's family was not wealthy, she grew up comfortably, dividing her time between their home in Cambridge and 7 acres, a farm on Cape Ann at Annisquam, Massachusetts. Anna was tomboyish as a child. Among members of the family, she was known as the Clam because she could always keep a secret. Anna's father was her most important mentor. From him, she learned scientific observation, how to remember and analyze a view that is seen for only a split second. But in the animal world, that split second was enough if one knew how to look. Anna gained from her father a keen knowledge of the anatomy and behavior of animals. She considered their home at 19 Francis Avenue in Cambridge among the most beneficial influences on her success as an artist. And she wrote, "I always had a delightful family life with cooperation for my work from my family. I always got a great deal of sympathy, which was a special help." Her father set up her first art studio at Annisquam and provided her with art materials. Her mother, Adela, encouraged her work in everything, but especially in music and art. Both sides of Anna's parentage revealed artistic ability. Her father's mother, shown on the left, had art training and was known to have painted well. Anna's mother, on the right, had talents as an artist, particularly as a painter of landscapes. Also, her mother assisted her father by copying his scientific data and by painting the sketches and diagrams for his books. From 1882 to 1894, Anna attended the Mrs. Smith's private school in Boston, where she became interested in the violin and devoted several hours each day to practice with the goal of a professional career in music. Although her school did not provide any art programs, Anna enjoyed observing and sketching animals. This informal, self-directed education was to be Anna's lifelong procedure in gaining artistic knowledge. Before she had learned to read, she knew the distinguishing qualities of breeds of horses from pictures, and during her youth, she trained and rode horses constantly. In 1894, her sister Harriet, already a sculptor of portraits and figures, asked her to model the dog in a life-size composition of a boy and a Great Dane. Anna later recalled this incident. "My first taste of sculpture came from an attempt to help my sister with a mishap to one of her clay models. At the time, I was giving 8 hours a day to the violin with the thought of that as a career." Anna modeled the dog, and the sculpture was accepted for exhibition. Encouraged by this success, Anna began to undertake serious instruction in her art. They worked together, Harriet doing the human figure and Anna the animals in collaborating groups. Anna also had instruction from Harriet's teacher, Henry Hudson Kitson of Boston. And this is considered to be her first sculpture in bronze, done in 1894. In 1897, Harriet and Anna collaborated on The Pride of Our Great Dane, shown in this sketch, a composition of a dog standing with its front paws on the shoulders of a boy, a characteristic pose of their brother Alpheus and the family pet. This sculpture was exhibited at the National Sculpture Society in 1898. In 1900, Harriet's marriage to Professor Alfred Mayer, one of her father's protégés, changed the plans the sisters had considered to form a partnership and establish an art school. Then their father died in 1902 when Anna was about to have her first solo exhibit at the Boston Art Club. After her father's sudden death, Anna went to New York City to pursue her art. She was 26 years old. Although Anna studied briefly in Boston and in New York City, she really was a self-taught sculptor. Her knowledge of animal anatomy, the basis for her sculpture, was the result of a keen power of observation, developed as a child through natural history field trips with her father and visits to her brother's farm at Drayton, Maryland. Eventually, the horse emerged as Anna's favorite subject, and when feasible, she incorporated equine subjects into her sculpture. During the early years of Anna's career, she worked hard to develop her art and succeeded in selling much of her work despite keen competition from well-known sculptors. Her studies of domestic and exotic animals were offered by Shreve, Crump & Lowe, a jewelry firm in Boston. After she moved to New York, her small bronzes were purchased by patrons in the Fifth Avenue Gallery of the bronze division of the Gorham Company. One of the first pieces to bring her recognition in 1903 was Winter Noon, a pair of workhorses huddled against the wind. This little sculpture was acquired by many public and private collections. In 1903, she enrolled for a brief period of study at the Art Students League. At first, she roomed with a fellow sculptor, Harriet Frischmuth. At the League, she also met Abystinia Eberly of Des Moines, Iowa, an event that resulted in a friendship and partnership. The two sculptors decided to share an apartment and studio on East 33rd Street with two other young women who were musicians. Abystinia carved this portrait of Anna Hyatt during this period. Anna's days were spent at the Bronx Zoo modeling the great cats and other exotic animals. Her mother continued to be a positive force in her life. They exchanged long, newsy letters weekly, sometimes more, and did so until Adela's death in 1932. Adela often wrote to tell Anna of the eligible young men who called at the house on Sunday afternoons and hoped that they would be lucky enough to catch her on a weekend visit. Adela's attempts at matchmaking fell upon deaf ears, as Anna had no time for the thought of courtship or marriage. After Anna was established in New York City, her mother came to visit, ostensibly to make sure that her daughter and roommates were eating properly. Anna wrote later that she really thought her mother enjoyed it tremendously. It was an exciting trip for someone as old-fashioned as her mother. Anna's brother Alpheus also encouraged her work and often invited her to his farm, Portobello, on the St. Mary's River near Drayton, Maryland. She said in a 1964 interview, "I used to go frequently, and especially in the wintertime. He had horses and cows and everything of that sort, and I trained colts and had a beautiful time riding all over the place." His early death in 1911 was a blow to her, but she stayed in contact with his widow, Clara, and her niece, also named Clara, who sometimes served as a model, especially when Anna was working on the second version of Joan of Arc. A contemporary footnote to Portobello is that Ben Bradley of the Washington Post and his wife Sally Quinn acquired the property, restored the house, and used it as a country home from the 1990s until Bradley's death in 2014. In 1904, Anna's small bronze Winter Noon was shown in an exhibit at the Louisiana Purchase Exposition at St. Louis, along with Men in Bull, a larger work in plaster created with Eberly. This won a bronze medal and brought national attention to both sculptors. By January 1905, Abystinia and Anna were collaborating on another sculpture, Boy and Goat Playing, to be shown at the Society of Animal Artists. She wrote to her mother, "Steenie and I were setting up iron all the morning. We are having the usual trouble with our armature, the men cutting pieces too long or bending them at wrong angles. We are using gas pipe, which we can get very near and cheaply. The passers-by nearly fall over each other staring when I walk out with a 4-foot gas pipe under my arm. By 1906, Anna's reputation was increasing and she was ready to go abroad to work. No formal art instruction was included in her itinerary. While abroad, she lived and worked in France and Italy. Over the summer of 1907, she enlarged some of her orders, including 2 life-size Great Danes for the Hammond estate at Gloucester, Massachusetts. She also worked on enlargements of her studies of Senor Lopez, a jaguar at the Bronx Zoo. 2 of these studies, Reaching Jaguar and Jaguar, were exhibited at the 1908 Paris Salon. The pair was widely acclaimed for correct anatomy and powerfully elegant feline grace. The prominent art historian and Professor Laredo Taft predicted, if Miss Hyatt never does anything further, she will have attained the highest possible height in American sculpture. After a quick trip to the United States in late spring 1909, Anna Hyatt returned to France, rented a studio outside Paris, and produced her first life-size Joan of Arc. It was shown in plaster in the 1910 Paris Salon and awarded first prize. But when she came forward to accept the prize, and the judges saw that the sculptor was a woman, they took away the first prize. Although she did all of the work herself, building the armature and emplacing over 1 ton of clay, a job she described as a terribly brutal piece of work, they awarded her honorable mention instead, believing that no woman could have completed the sculpture without male assistance. But she had the last laugh. Despite this disappointment, she returned to the United States in the summer of 1910 with an award to her credit and a promising future. From 1911 to 1917, Anna produced many pieces of sculpture and received both recognition and financial reward. In 1912, she was listed as one of 12 women in the United States earning $50,000 yearly. One of the people who had learned of her achievement in Paris was J. Sanford Saltus, a member of a New York committee formed to commemorate the 500th anniversary of the birth of Joan of Arc. The committee commissioned Anna in 1914 to create a monument of Joan that would occupy a prominent location overlooking a park at Riverside Drive and 93rd Street. Her second version of Joan of Arc was completed and unveiled in 1915 in New York City in the presence of a corps of dignitaries, including the French ambassador and Mrs. Thomas Edison, who pulled the cord to unveil the sculpture. President Woodrow Wilson sent a letter of congratulation praising the monument and its historical and political significance for France and the United States. Anna had become a rock star. Joan of Arc was a turning point in her career and was important for 2 primary reasons. It was the first equestrian monument of a woman by a woman in New York, and it was the first monument to depict Joan of Arc with the correct arms, armor, and horse trappings of the time period. Anna described her concept. I thought of her there before her first battle, speaking to her saints, holding up the ancient sword. It was only her mental attitude that enabled her to endure so much physically. Anna Hyatt's painstaking process required making studies in clay from a nude model, then adding the armor, saddle, and harness. She made a total of 7 trial models from small to life size. The New York figure is a complete remodeling of the version from 1910. She studied details of arms and armor from tomb rubbings, paintings, and funerary sculpture. Among the important awards she received for Joan of Arc were the Saltus Gold Medal from the National Academy of Design, and she was made a Chevalier of France's Legion of Honor. In 1922, she was named an honorary citizen of Blois, France, where a second casting of the monument was placed. Other castings are located in Gloucester, Massachusetts, San Francisco, and Quebec. In 1917, a medieval-themed pageant was put on in New York's Madison Square Garden to raise funds for war relief. Anna Hyatt's appearance as Joan of Arc represented, quote, the thrill of the evening. Lights lowered and Anna, clad in full armor and riding a white horse, entered the room. According to an article about the pageant, a big American flag was unfurled at the back of the French heroine and saint, meaning Anna, and as the lights were turned up, the notes of the Star-Spangled Banner were sounded, and the entire audience standing sang the national anthem. It's hard to believe. Anna Hyatt's fame brought her new commissions and requests from art schools for public appearances and prizes. By 1920, she had completed several large orders, including another version of Joan of Arc, a standing wall figure in prayerful ecstasy, reminiscent of a tomb effigy, for the Cathedral Church of St. John the Divine in New York. She also received many commissions for garden and fountain figures, riding the coattails of the popularity of Joan of Arc. If she ever became too starstruck by these honors, her mother was always there, writing letters that brought her back to earth. And I quote, Marion Boyd Allen, who was an artist friend of Anna's, let her model go because she became obsessed with Christian Science and it got on Marion's nerves. Do you know, daughter, your chief attraction is the fact you haven't nerves. And writing from Annisquam in 1916, I have made one more appeal to Harriet not to bring the huge lizard. This was a creature that her son-in-law, Dr. Mayer, was studying. And it's apparently one of the difficulties of having a zoologist in the family. She wishes Anna was there because it would be such a relief to have someone so quiet, biddable, and neat in the kitchen. Now, if that doesn't take the sparkle off one's crown, I don't know what does. During World War I, Anna Hyatt worked as a farmerette at the farm at Annisquam. The Women's Land Army of America was a civilian organization created during the First and Second World Wars to work in agriculture, replacing men called up to the military. An article in the Cape Ann Shore, dated August 9, 1919, described her as the embodiment of Joan of Arc, wearing not French homespun, but khaki, faded to a light yellow by many washings. And this photograph accompanied that article. It went on to describe her work to contribute food to the war effort by maintaining a large vegetable garden, 2 cows, and 40 hens. The highlight of the 1920s was Diana of the Chase, winner of the Saltus Award for Merit of the National Academy of Design. One of a few compositions where the human figure is primary, it is the work that sealed her reputation as an important American sculptor and set new standards for American garden sculpture. The model for the figure was Marguerite Agnel, a dancer who rented space in the building where Anna Hyatt had her studio. Diana of the Chase was immediately popular, and as with Joan of Arc, Anna's public persona was linked with Diana, the Roman goddess of the hunt and the moon. The popularity of Diana of the Chase led to the design being adapted for use as a radiator cap ornament for the Diana motor car, manufactured between 1925 and 1928 by the Moon Motor Company of St. Louis. The Diana was marketed for women, believe it or not. Many women didn't even have driver's license in those days. And it was advertised as having curvy radiator cowl lines, a Diana cameo the car wears as a brooch on her radiator shell, and the beautiful goddess on her radiator cap. An original magazine ad stated that women buyers outnumber men 15-4. Even the design of the ads was feminine, using the text indented in the shape of Grecian urns. In 1923, there was a profound change in her life, a result of her marriage to Archer Milton Huntington, one of the wealthiest men in the United States and a major patron of the arts and humanities. They met when he commissioned her to design a medal for the Hispanic Society in 1921. In the following year, they served together on a committee to coordinate a landmark sculpture exhibition under the auspices of the National Sculpture Society. Archer Huntington provided the funding for the exhibition in the spring of 1923 that showcased hundreds of sculptures both inside the buildings and on the grounds of Audubon Terrace at Broadway and West 155th Street. After he asked her twice to marry him, and was twice turned down, she said yes on the third try. They were married March the 10th, 1923, a date which was also their shared birth dates and came to be known afterward as their 3-in-1 day. He was 53 and divorced with no children. She was 47 and had never had time for the demands of a relationship. The small private ceremony, a surprise to their friends and colleagues, took place in the Greenwich Village studio that Anna shared with the sculptor Brenda Putnam. From 1923 to 1927, Anna Hyatt Huntington's sculptural priority was the work she created for the Hispanic Society of America, an institution that Archer Huntington had founded in New York City in 1904. The focal point, El Cid Campeador, depicted Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar, the great medieval Spanish hero. In 1903, Archer Huntington had completed a critical translation of the 12th century epic poem El Cid, which remains a standard reference work today. Anna Hyatt Huntington's monumental tribute to El Cid is located in New York, in San Francisco, San Diego, California, in Seville and Valencia in Spain, and in Buenos Aires, Argentina. A rumor circulated after El Cid was completed that Archer Huntington himself was the model. Characteristic, Mrs. Huntington, the clam, never acknowledged the rumor. The years 1927 to 1934 were marked by illness and travel, as Anna Huntington had been diagnosed with tuberculosis and was advised to seek treatment and to spend the winters in a warm climate. Trips to TB sanatoriums in the North Carolina mountains, in the Arizona desert, and eventually in Switzerland's Alps resulted by the mid-1930s in what was considered a cure, although she was never completely free from the disease. A high point of this period was their purchase in 1930 of a hunt club on 4 rice plantations comprising thousands of acres on South Carolina's northern coast near Murrells Inlet. Their original idea was to create a winter home that would serve as a retreat from the world while Anna recovered her strength. She wrote to her sister in January 1930, "I must tell you about our one day at Brookgreen while it is fresh in my mind, else all that we have seen since will dim it. The old garden looked even more attractive, and a low bush of japonica was in bloom and very lovely. I felt a strong impulse to sit on the porch and not go back to the boat. The white sand paths that run among the trees, shining like patches of snow among the patches of yellow and green moss, add to the lure. Even the swampland is lovely, with the oaks and their long swaying mosses, the cypress with its uncanny trunk, bulbous-like mushroom growths, and lots of holly. As for me, I'm having the joy of my life watching the breakers on the beach. It has always been a dream with me to live sometime where I could watch every changing mood of the ocean. It's certainly a feast for the gods, and for a poor mortal, it fairly turns one's head with the wonder of it." So you can imagine we are anticipating much pleasure, and it will not be a life of pure idleness, for there is an infinite amount to do here. She wrote in her diary on April 15, 1930, "Archer has also decided to build something, decided that the seawall is an excellent start, and what he has in mind would probably be a hair raiser to an architect," referring to Atalaya, their home built on the beach. Lured by the beauty of the land and its environmental treasures, the Huntingtons set up a corporation to protect what eventually included 9,127 acres and named it Brookgreen Gardens, a society for southeastern flora and fauna. Its purpose was to collect, exhibit, and preserve the plants and animals native to the Southeast and American figurative sculpture. This was Anna's project from day one. She fell in love with the land, and as her scientist father had taught her, she wanted to preserve it and study it, She also wanted to break with tradition, and borrowing the idea from ancient civilizations, she placed her artwork outdoors on the spacious grounds, not just large monuments, but smaller sculptures that were carefully displayed in raised planting beds throughout the new garden, and in a roofless gallery designed by Archer. Anna drew the design for the first walls and walkways. At first, Archer and Anna Huntington donated personal objects to start the collection. As the Depression years continued, the Huntingtons were interested in assisting struggling artists by purchasing their sculpture, then donating it to Brookgreen. Also, the Huntingtons commissioned several landmark works for the collection, such as Riders of the Dawn by A.A. Weinman and Pegasus by Laura Garden Fraser. For 30 years, the sculpture collection reflected the personal taste and hands-on direction of Anna Hyatt Huntington. As a group of objects, it presents the collecting eye of this important patron of art. Today, her creation has become the finest collection of American figurative sculpture outdoors. The winter home they built on the beach was not the typical millionaire's resort. Inspired by Spain's atalayas, watchtowers built by the Moors, the home had a certain mystique. Even though he had the means to import craftsmen to construct a Moorish palace, Huntington decided to utilize local labor in an effort to provide an economic boost to the community. He created instead a Moorish-inspired design that could be easily constructed using local craftsmen and building materials. Anna wrote, "Mr. Huntington built a house right on the beach at Brookgreen, about a mile from the garden. We called it Atalaya, meaning watchtower. There I had a large studio where I could bring in horses and had a lot of geese, swans, monkeys, and an alligator, most of them wandering around at will, though not the alligator. He was a little too inclined to swish his tail. There was a family of rhesus monkeys, father, mother, and 3 youngsters of various ages. They were as savage and mean animals as you could run across. Only the youngest could you play with, and he used my head as a landing field from a flying jump, which was a little disconcerting when I was working." This photograph of Atalaya from the late 1930s shows part of the original Hunt Club beach house on the far right that was later moved to a location near US Highway 17. And on the far left, an early prefabricated structure built and used by the Huntingtons for a short period on the Waccamaw at Laurel Hill, then moved to Atalaya to serve as a dog kennel. The extensive fencing shown in the photograph provided runs and an exercise area for the Huntingtons' dogs. Brookgreen Gardens opened to the public in 1932, and by 1934 it had grown to include several gardens featuring landscape settings for sculpture, interspersed with reminders of the 18th and 19th century plantation. In 1932, Anna Hyatt Huntington became the first sculptor in America to use aluminum as a casting medium, preferring its brilliance of surface, which showed well even in poor lighting. It was also lighter and easier to ship than heavier bronze, and she sent around the world a popular traveling exhibition of her animal sculptures cast in aluminum. She produced a series of studies of Nubian goats and other goat breeds that were raised at Atalaya and at the farm at Brookgreen. Archer Huntington was particularly fond of goat's milk and its healthful properties, and Nubian goat was created in 1936. The forward momentum of the garden, zoo, and sculpture collection continued through the 1930s, despite the deprivations of the Great Depression. Among the Huntingtons' many contributions to the region was a private public works program where farmers, fishermen, and the unemployed were trained in the skills of bricklaying, carpentry, plumbing, electrical work, and other building trades when hired to work at Brookgreen. The actual construction of Brookgreen Gardens and Atalaya provided many needed jobs for area residents. For the first time, electricity was available on the Waccamaw Neck, brought on a line across the rivers from Georgetown and paid for by Archer Huntington. He also built a clinic, staffed it with local doctors, a dentist, and a resident nurse, and made it available to everyone in the community. Some 20 years later, after a new hospital was constructed in Georgetown, the Brookgreen Clinic was closed and its equipment was donated to the hospital. By local accounts, the Huntingtons were financially supporting more than 300 families through the payrolls for Brookgreen Gardens and Atalaya, including providing them with new houses with screens on the windows, giving them food and clothing, reclaiming and amending land to grow better food crops, building churches, building and staffing schools at Brookgreen and on nearby Sandy Island, and funding college educations for promising young people. There were smaller, though no less significant gifts, such as providing shoes for every worker and child living on the property. Anna wrote in her diary about the order of shoes in various sizes and styles coming from Sears and Roebuck on the riverboat Comanche up the Waccamaw from Georgetown. They also provided gifts and turkeys for everyone at Christmas and paid for a properly inscribed gravestone after the death of the oldest resident of Georgetown County. These and similar activities went on throughout the 25 years that the Huntingtons were directly involved with Brookgreen Gardens and Atalaya. In the late 1930s, the Huntingtons purchased property near Redding, Connecticut, and built a house that became their final home, naming it Stainerig Farm. In 1940, the Huntingtons donated their Fifth Avenue townhouse and adjacent properties in New York to the National Academy of Design for use as a gallery and art school. A few years ago, this property was for sale for $79.8 million, and today it is once again a private home. The final sculpture, done in the 1950s, was one of Anna's most dynamic. Fighting Stallions was created in 1950 to provide a sculpture at the entrance to Brookgreen Gardens that served as a landmark and an enticement for the highway traveler. At 16 feet high, 12 feet wide, and 6½ feet deep, it was the largest sculpture at that time cast in aluminum, and it has become the symbol of Brookgreen Gardens. Today, there are 108 pieces by Anna Hyatt Huntington in the collection of 3,000 sculptures by over 450 artists. After a long illness, Archer Huntington died in 1955 at age 85. Anna was at his side, caring for him for the better part of 5 years before his death. In 1958, at the age of 82, and despite operations for cataracts, Anna resumed working. At 85, she was described in a magazine article as a woman of vigorous wit and charm who can scamper up a 10-foot ladder to work on her massive sculptures, or knock down with her .22 caliber rifle any squirrel which molests the birds on her estate. On her 90th birthday, members of the National Sculpture Society visited her home and held a party in her honor. Anna Hyatt Huntington completed her 11th and last equestrian sculpture when she was 93. The statue of Revolutionary War hero General Israel Putnam was placed at the entrance to Putnam Memorial State Park in Redding, Connecticut. Toward the end of her life, she had many pieces in the studio from earlier periods cast that had never before been put into permanent material. She reworked earlier pieces, such as her small bronze on the left from 1914, which became the monumental in memory of the workhorse in 1964. Sensing that she was running out of time, Anna Hyatt Huntington was driven to finish her work. Illness compelled her to give up going to the studio about a year before she died. She suffered several small strokes during that year. Finally, on October 4th, 1973, Anna Hyatt Huntington died at the age of 97, and her body was interred next to Archer's in the Huntington Mausoleum in Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx. Today, her sculptures may be found in museum, public, and private collections all over the world. Although she never had formal students, Anna encouraged and critiqued the work of many up-and-coming sculptors, such as Harriet Frischmuth, Catherine Lane Weems, Brenda Putnam, and Abystinia Eberly. She gave them room in her studio to work, a welcoming place to go when they were feeling alone or their work unappreciated, and shared access to the expert foundrymen who cast her work. She was philanthropic, giving her money to those less fortunate and establishing programs that continued long after she was gone. In 1978, portions of the Brookgreen Gardens property, including the sculpture garden, were listed in the National Register of Historic Places, and the 50-year existence requirement was waived due to the significance of the sculpture collection. In 1992, Brookgreen Gardens, with the Huntington Winter Home, Atalaya, was named a National Historic Landmark in recognition of Anna Hyatt Huntington's importance as a sculptor and patron of the arts, and because of Brookgreen's significance as a site for women's history in America, a result of Anna Hyatt Huntington's personal work and of the number of women artists represented in the sculpture collection. In addition to the creation of Brookgreen Gardens, Anna Hyatt Huntington's contribution to Georgetown County includes over 9,000 acres that are forever preserved for the benefit of the public. The protection and conservation of habitats for plant and animal species that were not yet threatened in the 1930s, but today are endangered, was the act of a visionary who fell in love with the land as soon as she set foot upon it. This unique ecosystem stretching from the Atlantic Ocean across the Waccamaw River to Sandy Island has been preserved. Her agreement to lease oceanfront acreage to the state of South Carolina in 1960 provided Huntington Beach State Park, an important beach, salt marsh, and maritime forest ecosystem for the public's use, echoing her husband's early statement, Brookgreen Gardens is a quiet joining of hands between science and art. Anna Hyatt Huntington's career spanned nearly 8 decades, from age 18 to age 96. She won every major sculpture award in existence, including some that were created just for her. She left a remarkable body of fine work and a philosophy that was uncompromising. She once said, "No really dedicated artist is ever satisfied. You never quite achieve what you aim for. You always wonder, why didn't I do better? I live in fear that I may someday be satisfied with what I do. Then I will know that I am no longer an artist." Thank you. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
Is there a statue of Joan of Arc that she did in Rouen in France, where Joan of Arc was put to death?
There's one in her birthplace. I don't think there's one where she died. Yes, sir.
Could you recommend a biography? There's probably a few of them. I don't know how many. You don't know? There's none?
There really isn't.
Oh, no.
I've been working on one for 20 years.
Well, I urge you to
There is a book that is out currently still. The Remarkable Huntingtons is the title. And it's good up to a certain point, but the author who was an investigative journalist in her career, this was written when she was much older, got some of it right, but she didn't have the knowledge of art to draw some of the conclusions that she did. So if you read that, take it with a grain of salt. The pictures are great. She got the photographs directly from the archives at Syracuse University, most of the photographs where Anna's papers are located. But, you know, I hate to talk poorly about a fellow author, but it's not all correct.
Okay. But then my follow-up question is, when can we expect you to
Well, if I don't finish soon, I'll be in disgrace. I know that. Maybe two more years.
Okay, I'll be around.
Yeah, yeah, me too, you know. But if I'd been smart, I would have done either a biography or a catalog of her work. But it's both, and you know, I'm just stupid that way. So.
Well, that's great to look forward to.
Well, thank you.
You and for me.
I hope. Yeah. Keep your fingers crossed. Yes, ma'am.
So Anna Hyatt Huntington had a vision of what she wanted along with women. You're currently curating. What are you looking for now to continue what she did?
Well, as a curator, I must follow the guidelines that she set forth. You know, we are limited to American figurative sculpture, realistic sculpture, and there is some latitude within that rather narrow focus, but that's also what makes Brookgreen fabulous, is because of that narrow focus. Wayne Craven, who was considered probably the best art historian in American sculpture, wrote that Brookgreen Gardens was great because of that narrow focus, because we didn't include all the many streams of American art where we would dilute our message. So what I keep trying to do is to stick to that narrow path. And when you are in a place for many years, you know, that job becomes a little easier. In the beginning, I had to go out to people. Now people come to us. They know Brookgreen. I've developed relationships through the years with the artists, and many of them are leaving contents of their studios to Brookgreen. That can be a blessing, but it can also be a curse. But even so, you know, we appreciate anything that comes to us as a gift that's appropriate for the collection. Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell us more about this beautiful portrait?
Yes, this is a portrait by Herbert Bonnert, who was a rather well-known illustrator and portrait artist in the years, really the 20th century, before World War II and a little after World War II. He painted several portraits of both of the Huntingtons. With Anna, he always showed her at work, and the sculpture she's working on there is titled The Torchbearers. The large casting of the Torchbearers is located in front of the Chrysler Museum in Newport News, Virginia. And there are other castings in places around the United States and out of the United States, in fact. This is from, I think it's 1956 when this was painted. So she was in her 70s. Can't do the math in my head right this minute, but it was also painted from a photograph. Yeah, he painted one portrait of her working on Jose Marti. I know that she cringed because you see she's wearing a work shirt. That's what she typically wore, or an artist's smock when she was sculpting. And
with the French cuffs.
with the French cuffs, yes. But in the portrait working on Jose Marti, she's dressed in a, what looks like a Chanel suit, and she's wearing pearls. And Anna was not a jewelry woman at all. I mean, the strand of pearls was really the only thing that she really ever wore when she had to get dressed up. And I don't know why she would have been dressed that way unless Archer had requested it, although Jose Marti really came about after Archer's death. But the few times that she is dressed to the hilt was at the request of Archer for a formal portrait. So, she was a country girl at heart.
Robin, thank
Yeah.
you so very,
Thank
very
you.
much. And we will have the presentation of the book in 2 years. In the new library.
Sorry to put the heat on.
Wonderful presentation. What a blessing, and what a wonderful place to live. And what wonderful people who are here. Robin, thank you so much. Speaking of the new library, just to give you a little bit of detail, to let you know what's been happening and what's going to be happening, you see that the new auditorium is underway out here. They're putting the roof up, which is really exciting. It was delayed by 4 months, and now is moving ahead extremely rapidly, which is a good sign. And the anticipation is to let everybody know that June 2nd, Friday, June 2nd, will be the last day the library will be open here, with the construction then following. This building here is going to be completely renovated. Everything on the interior is going to be stripped out with new walls, new ceilings, new floors, and new HVAC, all kinds.
You have to move the books.
So what's going to happen is there's 89, I don't know who counted this is a typical librarian, there are 89,000 pieces that are here that need to be packed up and removed. And they have purchased 6,000 boxes. Do you like all these numbers?
Yeah, sure.
And beginning the following week on June 5th through June and July, everything needs to be packed up and taken out so that that renovation can be taken place. I had sent out notice, if you're on the Friends email list, that we're looking for volunteers to help us out. They're going to be doing the packing through volunteer assistance, not only the Friends of the Library, but a number of civic organizations, student groups, and so forth. They're looking for volunteer opportunities. So if you are interested in helping us out, I have put together a list that as soon as I get word, from Dwight that we need a team to come in, I'll send out notice to that group. So if you are interested, probably the best way to do it is we've got some forms back there which are membership. You don't need to join. But if you put your name and email address on there, I'll put you on the list and send word out to you as soon as I hear from Dwight that we'll be starting to pack up. But that'll be through June and July. The anticipation is that all this, most of that will be moved over to the Howard Center for storage during that period of time. And also at the Howard Center, there's going to be a setup of what's been described as I like the phrase, mini micro library. You get the double, it's going to be a small library, with particular emphasis on the children's reading materials, so that that program can continue all the way through. And Sheila, who directs the children's programs here, is going to be having all of the reading programs and music programs for children continue over at the Howard Center. But there will also be access to books there for others as well. So in particular, if you're interested in helping out with some of the volunteer activities, particularly through June and July, as we pack up and put those things away, please let me know by filling out a form. Just give me your name and email address, and we'll stay in touch. Not making a commitment on your part necessarily, but just keeping you informed of what's transpiring. The anticipation is that it'll be completed within about a year. Dwight has indicated that they're hoping for a full grand reopening in July of 2024. Did I get that right? I think that's the right year. And so that's what the anticipation is with the construction, but it's moving along very quickly, and very pleased with how things are transpiring. But it's going to be beautiful, a nice new interior to our library that's, I think, going to be very, very nice. And we'll continue to keep you informed on our email list as to what's transpiring with the construction. I also want to mention that our schedule for 2023-24 for Tuesdays With has been completed. I'm very, very excited about a list of speakers beginning on September 19th. So in September through May, we're going to be having our I should mention, all the construction, we're going to continue all of our programs of the Friends of the Library. And like COVID, we're going to be creative and different and see how we can continue to do those things. So we are planning to have our community yard sales in the fall and the spring. We're going to be having our Yuletide home tour, and we're going to have our Tuesdays With. It is going to continue. Right now, we're still not sure where. So we are sort of pilgrims and wanderers in Georgetown, trying to find that place where we'll be located. But we'll get word out to everybody. But it will be on the third Tuesday of each month, September through May. And beginning on September 19th, now I'll get back to what I was starting with, September 19th, when we'll have Victoria Smalls, who's the Executive Director of the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor, which is a federal program supporting the Gullah Geechee community culture that stretches all the way from northern Florida up through North Carolina. And so we're really pleased to have Victoria here. And it's in the context of the Harriet Tubman celebration that's going to be here during August and September. And so we're really pleased to be able to offer this lecture at that occasion. Where, we don't know, but we'll let you know. And great schedule. There are copies of our schedule in the back. You can pick up a copy of that and put those on your calendar as we look forward to the 2023-2024 series of lectures, our 7th annual on that. And one other announcement, if I may, and that is in relationship to our weekly summer book sales that we have. We got word back in, I guess it was March or April, that if you've been around, you know that every week at the farmers market, which was over in the parking lot of the old courthouse, we had a weekly farmers market book sale, which was extremely helpful to us. Within the Friends of the Library, allowed us to raise the last 2 summers close to $3,000 to $4,000. And that's pretty good when you realize we're selling paperbacks at 50 cents and hardbacks at $1. That's a lot of books. But the community has been very supportive. It's a great way to get involved. We have been, I think, a help to the farmers market, bringing people in. But unfortunately, we heard in March or April that they were not going to be having it this year. Al, if you weren't here, I'd still talk about you in a really good way. Al Joseph, for the city, has picked up on this and actually was working last December on the possibility that something might happen. And so we're looking at, if the city council this Thursday will approve it, we're going to have a city-supported farmers market that's going to be out at the lot where the former City Hall was located. And so a nice location there, essentially at Front Street and 17. And in fact, a much larger farmers market. We're hoping to combine all the activities that are happening within the town, within the city, and to be able to have a farmers market, which will start, hopefully, I'm doing all this conditionally, Al, am I doing it right? On May 27th, Saturday, May 27th, Memorial Day weekend. And we hope you'll come too. Yeah, that's on all this. To be able to have that, which will be great for the town, or great for the city, and also, I think, for the Friends of the Library. We hope you'll come and support us and the farmers market at that time. That's a lot of announcements, and I'm sorry to take you on that, but what a wonderful presentation. Thank you, Robin.